All right, so this is the first of two very brief videos over the lymphatic system. It's a very short chapter, so these videos aren't going to take very long. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with an overview of the lymphatic system and go over lymphatic vessels, which we talked about a little bit in our last chapter, and then talk about the flow of lymph through the body in this video. All right. So an overview of the function of the lymphatic system. So it has a few different important functions. One is immune, all right? So the lymphatic system functions in the immune system. You might know this if you've had a cold or something and your lymph nodes swell. That's because those lymph nodes are actively helping you fight that infection, all right? And so lymphocytes, right, are involved with the lymphatic system. So in the lymphatic system, lymphocytes are made and they mature and they encounter different antigens all within the lymphatic system. Okay, then the lymphatic system, as we talked about last time, functions to remove interstitial fluid. So that fluid that seeps out of the capillaries due to the differences in pressures that we talked about in the last chapter, that fluid is going to be removed by these lymph vessels. And then also, and we're going to talk about this with the digestive system, lymphatic vessels are very important for transporting the fat that is absorbed from our food. So there are lymphatic vessels throughout the GI tract that function to absorb that fat from food and transport it to wherever it needs to go to be processed or stored or anything like that. Okay, so let's talk about lymphatic vessels now. All right, so over here to the right, we kind of have our typical picture of a lymphatic vessel, and so they're made up of simple squamous epithelium. And what you can see with this picture is that those cells, those squamous epithelial cells, kind of overlap each other, okay? And so that's very important to the function of these lymphatic vessels, that we have these overlapping areas, because as interstitial fluid builds up around that vessel, all right? So if we have fluid out here building up around the vessel, what it's going to do is it's going to start putting pressure on the walls of this vessel, and it'll press, and if it presses on this overlapping area, what happens is these little kind of mini valves open up in that overlap, and that fluid can kind of squeeze into the vessel like that, all right? And so that could also, you can kind of see it here, all right? So it can press on this and kind of open that little gap and get into the lymph vessel. And so that's how interstitial fluid enters lymph vessels, okay? And so they're kind of like little mini valves between those overlapping epithelial cells, okay? And so one thing about lymph vessels that's very unique compared to blood vessels is that they are blind-ended. Whoops. Blind-ended with a D. There we go. Just meaning that they actually have like an end, okay? Blood vessels are continuous with each other. There's no stop, right? There's no blood vessel that has an end to it. They all are connected to each other, but lymph vessels actually have an end point, okay? So they're blind-ended. And lymph vessels, because they're blind-ended, don't have any circulating pressure, any pressure that's going to move that fluid through the vessel. And so that means it needs other ways to keep that fluid moving. And we talked about this in the last chapter. Those ways are very similar to what veins use to keep blood moving in those low pressure veins. So lymph vessels have valves, all right? So we see a valve here, and that valve is going to keep the fluid as it moves through this lymph vessel, all right? It'll prevent it from being able to move backwards. That valve will catch it and keep it moving upwards towards the blood vessel that it's actually going to be returned to. And then also lymph vessels use skeletal muscle milking to help move that lymph upwards. All right, just like veins. So as you move, you're squeezing venous blood and lymph up, against gravity. And inspiration also assists in movement of lymph. All right, and then last time we also talked about what lymph actually is. So lymph is that interstitial fluid. It comes from blood, and so essentially it's plasma, like blood plasma, just with very few proteins, and obviously it's not whole blood, so it doesn't have any of those blood cells or anything. So just plasma with very few of the plasma proteins. All right, so now let's talk about the flow of lymph. Okay, and so we're going to start at the bottom. So lymph being collected in the legs, right, and the abdomen is going to filter upwards towards this kind of bulged area. And so we'd have lymph collected here as well, being sent into that large area. That is called the cisterna chyli, okay? So lymph from the legs and the abdomen is going to travel up to that cisterna chyli. It's kind of like an enlarged part of the lymph system in the abdomen. And then from the cisterna chyli, it's going to travel up through the thoracic duct. All right, and so the thoracic duct would just be this big duct here going straight up, and it goes through the thoracic cavity as well. So it would travel, this would be the thoracic duct here, all right? And so that thoracic duct, as it's moving up, is going to also be collecting lymph from these areas that it's passing. And you can see lymph from this arm here also comes and joins onto that thoracic duct. Okay, so the thoracic duct specifically collects lymph from the left arm, basically the left side of the upper body. All right, so the left arm, trunk, so that's the left side of the trunk, and face. Okay, so it's left, the left side, all of that. So as this thoracic duct is moving up through the thoracic cavity, it is collecting lymph from the left side of the trunk here, from the left arm here is being added, and then lymph would be coming down from the left side of the face into this thoracic duct, which kind of curves over and joins then the left subclavian vein. Okay? And so that thoracic duct takes all that lymph it's been collecting and adds it back to the blood. And it adds it at that left subclavian vein. All right? So the lymph is returned to the blood. Because essentially, remember, again, it is just blood plasma without the proteins. Okay? All right, so that is kind of the left side of the body as well as the legs and the abdomen. Now let's talk about the right side of the body. So for the right side, we have the right lymphatic duct, okay? And so that is going to be this duct here, all right, branching off just above that cisterna chyli. So that right lymphatic duct is going to be collecting lymph from the right side. All right, so this is going to be the right arm, trunk, and face. Okay, so specifically the right side. And then that right lymphatic duct is going to take all that lymph and it is going to deposit it into the right subclavian vein. So it travels up here, curves around, and joins with this right subclavian vein to return the blood to that vein. Okay, so that is the pathway of lymph. All right, lymph from the upper right side of the body goes into the right lymphatic duct. Lymph from the upper left side of the body as well as the legs and abdomen go into that thoracic duct. All right, they're both returned to the subclavian veins. It just depends on which side they'll go into. All right, So that's the first section of this chapter. And so the next section, we're just going to talk about the lymphatic structure. So lymph nodes, spleen, thymus, that kind of thing. All right, so that'll be on the second.